Good morning. So in the last lecture, we were looking at some, or rather, 1D heat conduction in a plane wall, and we looked at this method of the equivalent circuit, which could be used, as I said, for steady state problems where there is no heat generation. So I'll apply that method to a few other geometries today. But before that, let me just take an example which is not strictly 1D, but where this method can still be used to give us some answers or some solutions which are fairly accurate. So let's look at a particular scenario where, let's say, the problem looks something like this. Say we have some geometry where I can define maybe some blocks. Okay, so there's a composite system which is made of four blocks. I can maybe label them. So this is block one, this is two, three, and four. And their geometry, their material, geometry is also known, and the material property is also known. So let's say this is L4, this is L1, this is L2, which is the same as L3, but for now I'm just keeping it as in a general way. The This composite is actually insulated on two ends. So this is an insulated wall, which means there is no heat transfer from that surface. It's an adiabat. And then we have two maybe fluids which can exchange heat with this composite. Okay, the area is also known. Let me put this here. So this is, let's say, cross section area is A. Let's just, for simplicity here, even though it doesn't matter, let's say this is A by 2 and this is also A by 2. So the blocks 2 and 3 have half areas. Okay, so the problem is, or the question is, how do we calculate the amount of heat transfer between, or passing through this composite slab? And we're doing this at steady state, so we're not concerned about the transient effects. So I'll use the equivalent circuit model very quickly to define some things. So as you can see that there are lots of resistances in this problem. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention conductivity. So this is K1, this is K2, K3, and K4. So as I was saying, there are lots of resistances and there are lots of potential points. So potentials are, let's say, T infinity 1, and we will go all the way to maybe T infinity 2. There are two potentials through which, or across which current, this heat current flows. So we'll have the first resistance that we will see in the circuit will actually be the convective resistance, and maybe that brings us to some temperature which is on the surface of the first object. So this convective resistance is 1 by H1A, and similarly on the other end we will have 1 by H2A as a resistance, the convective resistances. Now what happens in between? Now here is a thing that you need to understand, that, see, if you see this block, it's a homogeneous block, and so heat transfer, I can assume, would predominantly be one dimensional through this case, because these are adiabats. So I know that at steady state heat will actually be flowing only along maybe the x direction, that I have not defined here, but let's say that is the x direction. So I can write that the resistance there would be L1 by K1A. And similarly on the other side, by the same logic, for block 4, the resistance will be L4 by K4A. Now the problem that I'm trying to pose, or the thing that we're concerned about, is what happens here through these two blocks, because this doesn't seem to be, I mean, it's an asymmetric system. There are two blocks with two different conductivities, so this need not be fully one dimensional. if the two blocks have the same conductivity, yeah, we could say that it is one dimensional, but right now it is not. The two blocks have different conductivity, so they will also have different rates at which they will, allow the heat to travel. So there are two ways of doing this, or calculating, doing this back of the, or I would not say, but some calculations which are fairly accurate, but can be done analytically instead of doing, writing maybe the two-dimensional equation and then trying to solve that two-dimensional partial differential equation. So the first method would be, I can, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to define a few sections on this sketch. So let me say there is one section which is, so we have a section, let's say XX, and let me draw a different section just by a different color because I will use that. So we have a section, let's say YY. So the first thing that I will assume to do this calculation is that I could say that, let's say section XX and YY separately are isothermal. If I say that the two sections are isothermal, what do you think will happen now to this unknown here? If they were isothermal, if this section isothermal would mean that this is, all points along this section are at the same temperature. Similarly, all points along this line are at the same temperature. So what do you think we can do now? Can anybody guess, or should I just go ahead and write the answer? What do you think will happen
So
here? What kind of
we
resistance
will,
should I put in here?
so two parallel resistances.
Very good. So we'll have two parallel resistances. So that's a good point. So what we can do now is that instead of putting, in this unknown section, I would have one resistance here, one resistance here, and that's it. That would basically be connected to the two ends. So the resistances here would be, if I say R2, R2 would be L, what is it? L2 by K2, and its area is A by 2, so I'm going to have a 2 in the numerator. Similarly, R3 will be 2L3 by K3A. Remember, it's a cross section area, so area is A by 2. So we get this 2 in the numerator, not because it's twice the resistance, but it's just because the area is half. Okay, so this is an example of heat conduction in, I would say, in parallel. And so we have put resistances in parallel. So far in the last class, we looked at heat conduction only in series, but this is an example where heat conduction could be taken to be in parallel. Now that is one approach. The second approach, which is also will give you very fair, very very close answers to the, if you do a full scale, simulation, or do a full calculation of this problem. The second case is where I can define another section, and let me say I will draw it passing through the interface of 2 and 3. So I will draw a section like this. So let's say this is section ZZ or ZZ. So if I look at this section, okay, so I'm looking at this section now, the one that divides uh, the problem into two parts. It need not be, I mean, right now, because the areas are A by 2, so it divides them into exactly two equal parts, but it need not be. I mean, it is just by, by chance that I've taken areas to be A by 2, but it divides it into two systems. And what I would assume is that this section ZZ is actually an adiabatic surface, or an adiabatic line, if you want to say. What it means is, if this surface is adiabatic, then there is no heat exchange across this surface. So some amount of, so whatever heat travels, it travels in the top section, unhindered. It doesn't have to go down. And similarly, this heat traveling through the bottom section will not go up. It will just go straight to the right, of course, because the two ends are insulated. That is the reason one I can actually come up with this kind of simplification. So if I do this now what would happen to the circuit? So now this case is interesting, because now we will have, as you can see, we have two, you know you can consider this to be a case of two composite slabs conducting heat from left to right, okay, in parallel. So I can draw this as very similar to what I had done earlier. So maybe T infinity 1 is one potential. So I will have 1 by H1A, which would be the convective resistance, and maybe I can go from the other end. So we'll have T infinity 2, 1 by H2A. And now a lot of things will happen between these 2 points. So we'll have two parallel networks of heat conduction. So I can draw one as, which will have, let's say, in this case, yeah, L1 by K1 A, and by the, I will use a half there because it's, I'm divided the whole thing into half, so that there will be three resistances. One would be L1, or corresponding to slab 1. The second would be corresponding to slab 2, and the third would be corresponding to slab 3. Oh, sorry, L4, not L3. This is L4 because it's going through 4. And in the bottom, we'll have another parallel circuit which will be passing through slab 3. So we'll have two circuits, or rather two parallel networks, which will allow heat to go conduct from left to right, or right to left, whichever temperature is higher. So that could be one alternative, or one alternate to calculating heat conduction problem, or solving two-dimensional, seemingly two-dimensional heat conduction problems by using one-dimensional methods. Okay,
Sir, in case 1,
yeah.
is any plane between XX and YY plane isothermal?
No, that is a good point. That need not be. That I have assumed, but I am not assuming every point between them is isothermal.
So then won't be there heat current in vertical direction?
So that is what, see, it could be. It is actually, but in this case, if you think of it this way, that it's at steady state. So at steady, I mean, this again, I'm saying that it could have been in the transient case, but in this case, we are by assuming that the two ends are isothermal. By assuming the two ends are isothermal, yeah, we're taking that part, and because it's at steady state, the cross conduction of heat is actually, it may be there. By the way, it's a good point. It may be there, but we are not taking that into account, because that will actually make it harder to solve, and the problem will then become fully two-dimensional, which cannot be then solved using these simple methods.
So
But yeah, you
then
have a
in a
good
way
point.
we are assuming that any plane in between them are
Right,
isothermal,
right. So
right?
actually, yeah, unless it's a good point. Unless we assume that every plane in the middle of, or in anywhere in between sections XX and YY is also isothermal. So that is sort of, we
But,
implicitly now assuming that everything is isothermal there.
but sir, like if we are in steady state, then the temperature variation across any material will be linear with distance. So if the
Yes,
distance is same for both the slabs and the two surfaces X and Y are isothermal, that then at any cross section won't they have the same temperature? Then
yes.
why do we
That's
need
so.
to assume that?
No, no, no. It would, no. They would not say. I'll say there are two different things.
Uh,
Uh, First thing is that,
These are different for both the slabs. So
yeah. Please go
heat
ahead.
conduction coefficient is different for both the slabs. So then delta T won't be same. So I think since the heat conduction
No, no,
coefficient
it
is
is,
different for both
no, no.
slabs,
See, no,
then
no. Think of
delta.
it this way. No, no. Think of it this way. I'll simplify the problem for you. Uh, the delta T for the two slabs, 2 and 3, are, is, we are assumed that to be the same. Okay, because that's what we have done here. If you look at this network now, the delta T across which heat is flowing is the same. Okay, resistances are different, so heat flow will be different.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the current will be will be different in each section, but it's still flowing under the same what should I say, under the same potential difference, under the same temperature difference. If this is a simple, I mean, the simplification is that, think of it this way, that if one conductivity is very high out of these two, let's say K2 is much higher as compared to K3, in that case you will have almost a flat temperature, I mean not always, so but you'll have most of the heat passing through 2 instead of passing through 3, because 3 will be offering actually a very large resistance to heat conduction. Okay, can we move on?
Yeah, okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, so what the reason I was picking up this problem is that, so in case you see any two-dimensional problem, and if it's steady state without any heat generation, the first approach to follow should always be this equivalent circuit method. Okay, so try and, or rather this electrical circuit analogy. Try and pick up the try and develop an electrical circuit of the problem and see if you can make some assumptions to get some answers. If those assumptions are untenable for some reason, as we'll see later now, that they do not stick, then it makes sense to go and solve the two-dimensional problem, using the differential analysis, which we'll also do in this course. I'll take one example of that as well. Okay, so let me move on to the next idea here, which we have so far, and this is called as contact resistance. So we have so far ignored it, but I would now like to bring it into the problem. So think of it this way, that you have two slabs, let's say we have, which we put together, which we sandwich, uh, and the slabs basically are, let's say, conducting heat from, let's say, left to right. So I can define some temperatures. Let's say we have a temperature profile maybe of this type in one slab, and in the second slab maybe, it could be more maybe flatter, let's say, okay, little flatter. So we have, let's say, temperature profile of that type. Now, what we have been assuming so far, if you, which I have not said very explicitly, but now let me say this: we have assumed a certain contact of the two bodies of these two slabs at the point where they come in, where they are touching each other. So we have so far assumed what is called as a perfect contact, and a perfect contact is actually one in which there is continuity of temperature and also continuity of flux. So remember, that's what we've been writing. I mean, so that's a boundary condition from left to right. If you have two slabs, by using the equivalent circuit, or rather this electrical circuit, we are actually saying that the temperature is the same at between two, where the two slabs meet. But also we are inherently saying that the flux, which is the measure of the heat transfer rate, that is also the same. So it's the same heat current passing through the two slabs. It's not, it doesn't change. But in reality, actually, this kind of linear, this kind of perfect contact doesn't exist. In reality, what you would see is that if there's a temperature profile, let's say, and I'm going to draw it one on top of the other here just to make a point. So in case, let's say, we have a temperature profile like this in slab 1, then in the second slab you will actually see a temperature profile of that type. So you can expect some delta T between two uh, dissimilar materials when they are put together. Okay, this delta T may be large, this may be small. It depends on the contact, and we'll talk about that now. What happens to different types of contacts. So why does this happen? So this happens principally due to surface roughness effects. So surfaces are rough, and so they don't get a perfect contact when you put them together. So what you would see is, microscopically, if I look at these, let's say, bodies maybe A and B. So microscopically, what you would see is that you have, let's say, surface A, and I'm going to draw a small portion of it. So surface A maybe has some irregular features on the surface. Okay, this is surface A, and surface B also has its own irregularities. So maybe something like that. So they have, these two surfaces basically have contact at a few points. So the contact points maybe are, let's say, here, here, and here. So you have heat conduction taking place at the point of contact. So I'm going to say this is, let's say, Q double dash conduction because of contact, or let me say contact, that is better. And then we have these gaps, right? So there are these gaps which where the two surfaces do not tend to meet. So what happens in these gaps? Now, when you put two surfaces together, what you should expect, and that's reasonable. I mean, that's, I'm sure some of you would have guessed by now. This will actually be an air cavity, or air would be trapped in this gap. And air is principally a very poor conductor of heat. So even though it does conduct, so in this gap itself, you will see some, let's say, uh, heat conduction, okay, through all these gaps. But it would principally be through the presence of air that is trapped in that cavity. Now, the other thing is, you can also imagine that the contact points, these are point contacts, right? These are, so they may be point or maybe surface, some surface contacts. But these, in reality, what happens is that these contact points, or the area of these contact points, if I can say, area of the contact points, is much less than compared to the area of these gaps. So these gaps take much more area. Yeah.
But sir, because, if the surface fitness is good enough, then this
So
delta
I'm
T
coming
can.
to that point. I'm coming to that. Wait. I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. Don't worry. So let me complete. So the gap area is much larger as compared to the contact area, and uh, it is also true that, see, now you have two surfaces which are in touch. So you also have these two heat transfer rates taking place in parallel to each other. So what we have just covered now. So these are now heat transfer rates which are not in series but in parallel. So there are two resistances. One would be for the gap and one would be for the contact. It so happens that because the area of these contact points is very large, or rather very small. Area of the contact points is very small as compared to the area of the gaps. Uh, the actual, uh, I should say, the actual conduction of heat happens through this gap only. Just because the area is small, and so gap basically dominates in a surface, and so heat transfer will happen through the gap. So that resistance dominates, or is the bottleneck resistance. And by doing that, what it does is, because air being an insulator, and that resistance is also substantial, is not very small, it's larger than the conduction resistance offered by the slabs themselves. So you see at the contact point, you would see this kind of drop in temperature. That would purely be because of this contact resistance coming into play. And so we define the contact resistance in a certain way. If I can use this figure itself to define some temperatures, let's say we have Ta here, and this is Tb. So I can write the contact resistance, which I'm also going to write in terms of R, Tc, and this is done typically per unit area. So I have, or for a unit area. So I have defined a double dash again to say this is for a unit area. So this is defined as the temperature drop versus the heat transfer rate, or the flux. So this is the definition of contact resistance that is typically used And more importantly, there are situations where this cannot be neglected. In scenarios, as somebody was correctly saying, and I will come to that now, that this may not be negligible, especially when you have scenarios that I'll show you now. And so it has to be considered when we are doing this kind of basic 1D analysis. Now, as I said, this happens because of surface effects or the surface roughness effects. So how this can be reduced? So there are three different ways of reducing this contact resistance. One is that we can, as somebody mentioned, we can have very smooth surfaces. So we can have a smooth finish of the surface. So that would mean that you have more contact points and you have a better contact, and so much more area for heat conduction through for from one slab to another without going through these air gaps. So we can reduce surface roughness, okay, where things come in contact, which may not be always possible. Please remember that if you're dealing with metals, you may actually be able to reduce surface roughness, but when you deal with the non-metals, it is not that easy. Okay, case in point being, let's say if you're dealing with wood will not you cannot, whatever you do, you cannot make it smooth into that particular finish. The other thing that you can do is uh, you can have an external way of reducing or closing out these gaps. So the external way would be that you can apply pressure on this joint. By applying pressure, you can actually somehow squeeze the gap. So we can have an external pressure on the joint or on the contact point of contact. So these are all possible ways of doing this. And the third way, which is typically very commonly used, especially when you cannot reduce surface roughness or you cannot have an additional load to be able to compress the point of contact. The third way is to use some kind of a material that can be used to fill these gaps, and a material which has a thermal conductivity which is more than the conductivity of air. So that material will fill these gaps and will allow conduction of heat more effectively. So we can use a substance that can fill the gap between the two surfaces. And so the property of this material should be that whatever substance we use, it should have a conductivity which is much more than conductivity of air. Now, one of the common ways of doing this and I'll show you an example now, in design of heat sinks, especially for electronic components, is to use a thermal grease. And this is typically a silicon based thermal paste which you apply between a processor and the heat sink. So let me just show you a picture of this. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. So you have a thermal paste. When you're making these microprocessors, or when you're assembling a computer, you may actually come across this idea that you have this thing in a syringe which you can actually put on top of the microprocessor as they're doing it here. So it's spread out on the top of the plate of the microprocessor. So you spread it out in a thin layer. You don't want a thick layer either, because the thermal conductivity of this thing is not so high as compared to metallic conductors. So it's a thin layer which is covered, and then you assemble the heat sink over that processor. So here we have a heat sink. If you can see, you have a heat sink which you have put on top of that thing, so that you have a perfect contact between two components. And then of course this is actually a forced air or a forced cooling system. So you also have a fan which is actually going to bring in air uh, and cool this heat sink more effectively. So we'll talk more about design of the heat sink at a later time. But for now, at least, you should know that this is one of the ways of or tackling contact resistance effectively. And you will see this in all electronic components, whatever you pick up, even in your phones, if you see there, you can actually see, if you're careful enough to open components, in with care, you can actually identify where the thermal paste has been applied. Okay, so that was about contact resistance. Let me now, we've looked at one dimensional heat conduction in plane walls in enough detail. So what I'll do now is to go into other systems, and we'll start with the conduction in radial systems. So 1D conduction, again, radial would mean that the direction along which we will consider heat conduction will be in the radial direction, or along the radius. And then we will also look at both cylinders and spheres. So this is still 1D. Let me be very clear about this. And we are still looking at steady state heat conduction. And we'll pick up the first case of a cylinder, or heat conduction in a cylinder, where maybe think of it this way, that we have a long cylinder, which is an annular cylinder. So basically the solid, cylinder is something like this, and it's a long cylinder. So I'm not going to, oh, I should also do this. So it's a long cylinder which has a solid section. So this is the solid section part, between which is the annular region. Okay, so this is all solid. I should either say hollow cylinder, right? Hollow with a certain shell. Say we have some fluid going through the inner tube, and some fluid may be flowing through the outer tube, or not through the on the outer surface. So maybe I can define that the outer surface has a hot fluid which is at temperature T infinity 2, and heat transfer coefficient is H2, so that is hot. And the inner section has a colder fluid which has heat transfer coefficient H1 and free stream temperature T infinity 1. Okay, the solid has the geometric dimensions are also given to us. So, oh, sorry, say the inner radius is R1 and the outer radius is R2. The solid has a thermal conductivity, let's say K, which is constant. And even though it's not important, let me say that the length is L, although we will use that in some way. So I'm going to say this is a very long cylinder, so that the length is much larger as compared to the radii. And I'm not going to concern, what that would do is it will allow me to say that the gradients of any property along the z direction are zero, because it's so long that you don't see any change along that direction. We will also assume axisymmetry, which would mean that d by d phi, or changes along the angular direction, are also zero. So that also doesn't show up. So this is axisymmetry. So the only change that we would see here now, because there are two fluids which are separated across a shell, so the only change in temperature that we will see will be along the radius, or along the radial direction. And we are going to try and quantify what would be the rate of heat transfer by conduction between the inner, or between the outer fluid and the inner fluid. Now I have, although your book does it in a different way, your book does it with, colder outside, hotter inside. I have deliberately turned it around because I want to explain some things about sign convention by taking this example. So don't get confused when you see this. If you're reading a book and you see that the answer looks a little ulta, but it's not ulta. It's actually the same thing, except the convention has to be very carefully looked into. So remember radial, what is the radial vector? Radial vector is always pointing outwards. So in this case, the radial vector is actually pointing from the colder fluid to the hotter fluid. So remember that. Okay. So how do we solve this problem? We can actually, first of all, we know that heat will be flowing from hotter to colder side, and there is no heat generation. So heat flow would be in the from outer surface to inner surface, which is in the opposite to the radial vector direction. So we expect that the heat flow will actually come out to be negative. I mean, the vector would be, if you write in terms of vector form, it would be negative. So the governing equation at steady state is 1 by r d by dr of kr dt dr, and the other terms being 0. And I'm saying it's steady state, so the right side is also 0. So you'll have the, d2 or rather 1 by d by d phi of k dt d phi, that term is 0, and then again d by dz of k dt dz, that is also 0, and then of course the right hand side would have been rho cp dt dt, that is also 0. So the governing equation is d by dr of kr dt dr is 0. And at this point, let me also say that at any cross section in this cylinder, right, if I take any cross section at some distance r, I should not say cross section again. Cross section would mean something else. I should say the surface area. Any such section which is at a distance r from the center. So this is distance r. What would be the rate of heat flow, right, through that area, through that lateral area? So that should be the flux times the area of that section. So the flux would be minus k dt dr at that location. So I can say minus k dt dr. And what is the area there? The area would be 2 pi r into L. So if k is constant, L is anyway constant, 2 pi is also a constant. So we have minus 2 pi k L r dt dr to be the rate of heat flow. Now, if you observe, what does the governing equation tell us? It's saying that d by dr of k r dt dr is 0. So basically, in a way it's saying other quantities being constants. It's saying that dqr dr is 0, which is what we should expect, and so that means that qr is a constant. So the rate of heat flow, which has to be, it's logical. There is no heat generation, right? There is whatever basically comes into a section, it has to go out. So in is equal to out is what is defined by qr equal to constant. So how do we solve this problem now? So of course qr is constant, but we don't know its value. So we can actually use this differential equation, and I will assume k to be constant to solve this problem. So k is, let's say, constant, which is I'm assuming here. So we'll have d by dr of r dt dr is 0, and it's easy to see what type of solution will satisfy this equation, right? So it means r dt dr is constant, which means that you can now then integrate one more time. So you can get temperature would be some C1 log of r plus C2. That is the general solution for this kind of equation. Now, how do we determine C1 and C2? So we'll go back to boundary conditions, but instead of writing boundary conditions again in terms of the heat transfer coefficient, which I will invoke later, not yet, I will go back to the same thing that I did in the case of heat transfer in a plane slab, that I would say that the two surfaces across which conduction is taking place would have a fixed temperature, even though the temperature may not be known yet to me, but the temperatures there will be time invariant because it's steady state. So I can say that in the boundary conditions, temperature at, let's say, r equal to r1 is, let's say, ts1, and temperature at R equal to R2 will be TS2. And so then we have two equations and two variables. We can determine C1 and C2. And so what you should get is T of R. Then I'm deliberately not doing that algebra here. So TS2 minus TS1 by log of R2 by R1 times log of natural log, I should say, natural log of R by R1 plus TS1. So that becomes the temperature distribution in this solid. So it's no longer linear; it's logarithmic, which is very important to observe. The other point is, if you want to just verify the boundary conditions, we can always do that. If you put R equal to R1, right, this term goes to 0. This becomes log of 1, which is 0. So you just get TR to be TS1 at R equal to R1, and similarly when you put R to be R2, these two cancel, and so TS1 plus TS minus TS1 plus TS1 is 0, and so you get TS2. So this is the correct temperature profile. Now once we have the temperature profile, I want to know what is QR, the rate of heat transfer in the radial direction. So QR would be minus K 2 pi RL dTdr, and this now I can write as minus K 2 pi L. When I take dTdr, it would have a 1 by R term, which will cancel with the R which is being multiplied here. So that would cancel, and so we get TS2 minus TS1 log of R2 by R1. And now I'm going to keep the negative sign here, which your book doesn't do, but I will keep it because I know that uh, this negative sign basically indicates, remember that I said how outer surface is at a is at a higher temperature, or outer fluid is at a higher temperature as compared to the inner fluid, which would mean that heat has to flow from outside to inside. So this negative sign is essentially telling me that it's going from outside to inside, because TS2 will be more than TS1. So everything else is positive. The negative sign basically now is telling me that heat flow is inwards and not outwards. So using this now, we can define the resistance to heat conduction in a cylinder. And the same thing, basically we are going to now say resistance in the same thing as we wrote in electrical circuits. So resistance would be delta V by I, right? So it would be the potential difference divided by the current. So in this case, the potential difference to flow of heat is actually this amount, and the heat current is QR. So I can use this to calculate or to write the equation for resistance in conduction resistance in a cylinder. So this will come out to be log of R2 by R1 by 2 pi Lk. Note that resistance is a positive number, so I'm refraining from writing a negative quantity or negative number there, because that is just because negative is just for us to say whether the current flows this way or that way. It does not mean that the resistance becomes negative. So that is a conduction resistance in a cylinder. So using this now, it is possible that, I mean, now I can go take a step forward and actually calculate what would be TS2 and TS1, or write even the heat current in terms of, the convection resistances and the conduction resistances. So I can now write for this problem that we had, remember, we had an outer fluid and inner fluid.
R1 missing.
Sorry,
Sir, I think when you differentiated the temperature, R1 is missing.
R1 is missing in which part?
Sir, QR.
No, it's not missing. It's not. Anyway, I'll move ahead. Please check. It's not missing. I know what you're thinking, but I would not correct you on that. अब calculus नहीं पढ़ाऊंगा मैं. Okay. So what was I saying? Yeah, so so we can now calculate what would be the rate of heat flow in this system using the same electrical circuit analogy. So we can write the circuit as, let's say, starting from T infinity 2 and heat current, let's say QR, flowing through the circuit. So first thing that the first resistance that you will encounter will be the conduction resistance. So that would be 1 by H2A2. Now remember that the area is also changing here. This is also a very key aspect, that this is a radial system. So area for heat flow inside is smaller as compared to area outside. So H2A2, it is not H2A or some undefined area. It is the area through which heat is flowing. So it's H2A2. Then we get to TS2. From TS2 to, let's say, TS1, we have heat conduction, whose resistance we just wrote is ln R2 by R1 by 2 pi Lk. And then from TS1 to, let's say, T infinity 1, we have 1 by H1A1 to be the resistance. And then this is where heat current is actually going out. So now these three resistances are in series. And so I can calculate QR will be the total temperature difference, which will be T infinity 2 minus T infinity 1 by the total resistance. The total resistance being 1 by H2A2 plus log of R2 by R1 2 pi Lk plus 1 by H1A1. Okay, so this I can say is the total temperature difference by total resistance. Now, when we are dealing with a plain wall or a plain slab, we also looked at this. We defined something called as an overall heat transfer coefficient. So we wrote that QR there. In fact, in that case, we wrote QR or whatever Q is some UA times the overall temperature difference. In with this case, it is T infinity 2 minus T infinity 1. That is the overall temperature difference. So I can now say that U into A should be 1 by R total in this case. And so the overall heat transfer coefficient U can be calculated from the resistance. But then here is a catch in this case, in this particular problem. The catch is that we are saying UA is 1 by R total, but A is it's not a constant. It's actually changing as you go radially out. So which area should we use, or what area should be taken to calculate the overall heat transfer coefficient? Now, there's no simple answer for this, except I can say this, that the choice of area, the choice of A, is arbitrary. That is the simplest answer I can give you. And by what I mean by arbitrary is that we choose a specific area in the problem, and correspondingly the heat transfer coefficient, the overall heat transfer coefficient, gets defined. So for instance, if I was to choose A1, which is the area of the surface area of the inner cylinder, where is if this one, if I was to choose the surface area of this cylinder, the inner cylinder only, so I could then write that A is A1, and correspondingly I will say U1, which is the overall heat transfer coefficient, which is associated with the choice of area A1. Similarly, I could have said I could also write this as U2A2. So I could choose the outer area, and then I could define U2 based on that number. So whatever we do, it's just same thing, that this UA, the item UA, is conserved. So you can choose an area, the heat transfer coefficient gets logged based on the choice of A that you have, or based on the choice of area that you make. And so this is always a constant. And this is what 1 by R total. So if A decreases, you will increase. If A increases, or rather, if A decreases, you will increase. If A increases, you will decrease. It doesn't have any bearing on the answer. It's just that we define, this overall heat transfer coefficient based on a specific area. Now, this is different from a plain slab. In a plain slab, the area remained the same. It was a plain slab, so you could define U anywhere, and it remains the same. But not in these radial systems where the surface area keeps increasing. Okay, so we could choose A1 as, or rather we could write in terms of area 2 pi R1L, and we'll have U1 to be maybe 1 by R total into 2 pi R1L, or I could also write U2 as 1 by R total 2 pi R2L. And that choice is completely up to you. You can define whichever way you want to define. There is no one way of doing this. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
we need maximum U for maximum QR. So shouldn't we take the minimum area so that we can maximize U?
No, but we are not trying to maximize U, because remember, U into A is a constant. Do you understand that? Do you see this?
Yes, sir.
So U in itself has no meaning. U alone in itself, H has a meaning. I mean, heat transfer coefficient has a meaning, not the overall heat transfer coefficient. Overall heat transfer coefficient is just trying to tell us that this is the total heat transfer that you can expect in a system if you are given a certain potential difference, and it takes into account all possible resistances in the problem. But it's not a quantity that you can measure or determine in some other way. So saying that we want to maximize U, I don't think that's the right interpretation of this quantity. Okay, it is. So it is most of you think of it this way, it's more of a post processing quantity instead of something that you are trying to maximize upfront. You don't know it at the beginning, but you may want to you can use it for calculations, for simplifying your calculations. But you do not try and say that we maximize, because as I said, if you maximize, A will decrease. So it is not max, because whatever amount you increase U, A will decrease the same amount, and so it's not overall heat transfer is not getting increased.
Yes, sir. I got that. I missed the point that UA is collectively 1 by R total.
Yes, UA was collectively one quantity. So you cannot change one. I mean, you can change them, but it would not make any difference. What you should be doing is, in these kinds of systems, definitely if you're trying to exchange heat between a outer fluid and a cooler, and an outer and an inner fluid, you should try and minimize resistance. So minimizing resistance would mean that maybe I mean, what do you think? What could be different ways of minimizing resistance? Let me ask this question now that we have covered so much on this. What could be different ways that we can achieve this? Can someone share something? How can we minimize resistance in this problem?
Preheating the cylinder before starting conduction.
No. See, if you're working at steady state, preheating will not matter, because that will only help in the initial transient system. In the initial transient stage where the temperatures are actually increasing or decreasing. Well, the simplest thing is you choose a tubing which has a high thermal conductivity. Okay, so I mean that is the simplest thing we can do, is to have a material. Don't choose a material that is an insulator. So choose copper or aluminum. That is one of the reasons why, if you see in air conditioners nowadays, when they advertise, they all talk about copper tubing. Why is copper important? Because copper has a very high thermal conductivity. So choose copper. Other thing would be, you can try and increase areas. Okay, because the resistance is inversely proportional to area, so you increase corresponding areas. It may not always be possible, because you may have space constraints, so you may not be able to fit a giant tubing somewhere. But the other way is that, if possible, use, so we can decrease, or rather we can increase the heat transfer coefficients. So we can have blowers, external blowers, which can actually move air or that fluid at a higher rate, because we know that heat transfer coefficient actually increases with flow velocity. If the flow is, if we go from free convection, which was flow happening just because of buoyancy, which is very, low velocity flow. Or we go to high velocity flow, when you have fans and blowers, that increases H. So increase in H will mean decrease in resistance to convection. So definitely the situation will improve, or overall resistance will decrease. So these are some of the ways that you can actually do this, minimize R. Okay, let's also look at one scenario now that we have looked at cylindrical systems. What if you have, let's say, a composite cylinder? Okay, so let's say we have the center somewhere, and I'm not going to draw the entire cylinder. So let's say there is one cylinder which starts at radius of R1 and one shell, and say let's say we have R2, R3. So this is, let's say, KA, KB. We can have as many as you want, but just for in this case, I'm just keeping it two cylinders. Let's say inside the cylinder there is a fluid with H1, T infinity 1 as properties. Let's say outside it is H2, to infinity 2. So these kinds of problems where you have these concentric cylinders, they can also be solved using the same approach, the equivalent circuit approach. And the approach basically will be that you can write the overall resistance to the conduction of heat, and then divide that. I mean, that use that resistance and use it to divide the overall potential or the overall temperature difference. So the overall, let's say, conduction resistance in this problem will be 1 by H1 A1. Let's say A1 is the area. I should define this here. Let's say A1 is the area here, which is maybe 2 pi R1 into L, which is in the depth, the length of the tubing or the pipe into the plane of the paper. Plus, we'll have the resistance now, which will be ln R2 by R1 by 2 pi L Ka, plus log of R3 by R2, 2 pi L Kb. We can have as many as you want, plus maybe 1 by H2, let me say for now A3. If we don't have any more, cylinders, then this would be 1 by H3, A3. So this could be, so just remember, in solving these kinds of problems, this is the simplest approach and should always be taken up instead of trying to go through the more rigorous way of maybe solving differential equation, the second order differential equation, and then applying boundary conditions at the interfaces of two solids, which is also right. I mean, that will also give the same answer, but we've already worked out that by using that, we only get this whole concept of resistance. And so we can use this concept very quickly to calculate the rate of heat flow instead of going through the rigorous method. Okay, let's also look at, so we looked at a cylinder. Let's also look at the sphere, and this I'm just going to cover very quickly within a minute. I think I've established the method fairly well, so I would request you to work it out on your own. But the problem would be something like this, that you have, let's say, a sphere which has cavity, okay, something like that maybe. So let's say we have an inner cavity in the sphere, and so this inside, maybe the temperature is Ts1, the outer surface is maintained at Ts2. It doesn't matter whether there is a fluid or something else, that would not change my analysis. Let's say the inner radius is R1, our outer one is R2, and I can take a shell at some distance R. The shell would be of thickness dr, and I'm actually following a slightly different way of solving it as compared to what I did in this case of a cylinder. So don't get worried, it's the same thing. We get the same answer in either way. Okay, so this is, a shell of thickness dr at a distance of r. So we can write what would be the heat flow through this shell. And we're doing this again at steady state. Needless to say, I've not gone to transient yet. And one-dimensional heat conduction with no heat generation. So Q dot is also 0. So QR would be minus Ka dt dr. And what would be the area of this shell? That would be 4 pi r square, through which some heat is going out, which is given by the gradient of temperature. So I know that from basic analysis, because there is no heat generation, there is no heat accumulation. So this should be a constant, as I did in the case of a cylinder. We reached there that K into R into dt dr is a constant. So here we are saying minus K 4 pi r square dt dr is a constant. So we can use this to actually to integrate. So knowing that QR is a constant, this is a constant, I can actually take the radial terms on the one side, temperature terms on the other side, and integrate and apply boundary conditions. So if we integrate and apply boundary conditions, what we will get is QR to be 4 pi K TS1 minus TS2 by 1 by R1 minus 1 by R2. So that will come out to be the rate of heat flow through this sphere, which would mean that the conduction resistance now, which would be temperature difference by heat current, should now be 1 by 4 pi K 1 by R1 minus 1 by R2. So that becomes the heat conduction resistance in a sphere. We could have got the same thing using the more rigorous approach, which is using the differential equation. If you recall, in the differential equation, we would have 1 by r square d by dr of r square K dt dr is 0. And so if K is constant, we essentially have d by dr of r square dt dr is constant, which is 0, which basically comes out to this equation only. It's the same thing. Okay, that these two are actually equivalent. Right? These are equivalent. So in this case, I've just taken the other approach, which is of energy conservation, as compared to going through the differential approach. Okay, so please, you should try out the differential approach as well. Try it out and see if you can get the same solution. Okay, integrate this and then prove to yourself that this is how it should be. Okay, so thank you.